Dear Dad, in my communications class, we had a unit on sexual citizenship. My assignment is to write to one of my parents and share what I wish I had known. It is really important for me to share what I'm about to say with you. You will probably be surprised. This is going to be the most honest conversation I've ever had with you.
Dear Dad, recently I have learned quite a bit of information on the topics of vulnerability and healthy sex. As a kid, I never really got proper instruction on how to be in a healthy relationship. Instead, sex became a way to get more intimate.
Dear Mom, I wish as a child that I had a safe environment for us to discuss sexual experiences. I've always known that these topics make you uncomfortable and did not want to upset you by bringing them up. Because of this, we never discussed anything about sex in our home. But in hindsight, I wish we had.
Dear parents, I'm taking a communication class right now, and I have some questions for you. Why didn't you talk to me about porn? Why didn't we have a conversation about sex? Why did it take me to be in a college class about healthy communication to learn that drunk sex isn't legal and that it can never be consensual? Why didn't you ever say anything to me in high school? I'm not mad or disappointed, and in all honesty, I'm confused. Was it easier for you to not mention anything? Learning this information was disturbing to me due to the fact that I'm in college.
Dear Mom and Dad, one of the classes I'm taking my first semester of college is communications. We've learned about many interesting topics, but this most recent one really stood out to me because it affected me growing up and many others. The topic was pornography and how it negatively affects your brain. I would say the first time I saw porn was in 7th grade, and it was an ongoing issue with me for the next couple of years.
Dear public school system.
Dear Dylan.
Dear Mother.
Dear state legislators.
To my parents and the public school system.
Dear Mom.
Dear Mom and Dad.
I was introduced to pornographic photos at 6 years old. I overheard the 5th graders at daycare talking about sex, and I wanted to research them for myself. Having an iPod Touch with no parental controls led me to Google images of naked men and women. I had no idea what I was looking at or why they made me feel certain ways. I now understand this was sexual arousal. I learned in my college class on sexual citizenship this semester that it is extremely unhealthy for a child to see this type of imagery because it begins a sexual maturation at an age in which children are not emotionally, physically, or sexually ready for it. I was too embarrassed and ashamed to ask you about the photos I saw and the feelings I felt. When I was 9 years old, someone dared me to look up RedTube on YouTube when I got home from school. This led to my introduction to pornographic videos. I had no idea what I was looking at or getting myself into. All I knew was this type of arousal was way more mature and exciting. Having those feelings at such a young age has led me to being a habitual viewer of porn all throughout my life.
Understanding how porn can affect the way men view sex really helped me understand what was upsetting me with some of the sexual experiences I had.
I want you to imagine a world where morals and values are tossed out the window when it comes to sexual relationships. Now look out your own front door. There it is. Today, safe consensual sex seems to have been pushed aside.
The sex talk you gave me was relatively short and to the point, but it was only about sex, the physical act. You never talked about foreplay or consent. These two things are honestly more important than sex because they should always happen before you engage in sex.
Because I never had sex education, I barely knew anything when I lost my virginity. I remember my first time he said, "Do doggy." I didn't even know what doggy was. It all clicked in my head after the first class. He didn't want to see who he was having sex with. He just wanted to lose his virginity. He had obviously seen porn before and gotten all his ideas about it from there. It wasn't me. I was just the means to the end.
One day in class, we talked about how it is not just okay to ask questions of your partner while in bed, but healthy. It is all right and frankly normal to not know what to do. It is okay to be vanilla and not want to be smacked in the face while having intercourse. Did you know that happens?
I wish I had someone to tell me back in high school that the portrayal of sex in porn was not sustainable or realistic. The porn I was watching to understand sex made me feel like I needed to be subservient to my partner, or I'm a bitch because I won't let him/her do something to me that makes me uncomfortable. I wish I understood before now that the sex you see in porn is just like social media, filtered heavily and very extreme to get views.
Perhaps knowing more than dry academic level detail of anatomy would have helped me formulate more productive opinions on my own experiences, and would have negated my feelings that compelled me to previously justify those who were wrong, dismiss the things that happened to me were wrong, and to turn a blind eye to the real suffering of others around me.
In class, I learned about what safe and healthy sex looks like. Unfortunately, it's not what teens experience today. Porn these days is something that can be addictive and honestly scares me. The first time I was shown porn was probably in middle school when my best friend Laura showed it to me on an iPad that she hid from her mom.
You never spoke with me about sex and sexuality. I guess you just assumed I'd figure it out myself. I suppose you did give me that book, that incredibly cisgender, heteronormative book that only went as far as to talk about your developing body and developing emotions. You never talked about anything else. It reinforced that idea in my mind when I started feeling things for other girls, that it wasn't normal, that I wasn't normal. I always wondered what would have happened if you had just sat me down and said, hey, girls can like girls and guys can like guys. You can like whoever you want, and that's okay. But you didn't. And I was on my own with my books and only a tentative grasp on what it meant to be gay. I did figure it out eventually, but it took me 6 years. 6 years of self-doubt and self-hate, all of which I could have been avoided if you had taken the time to have one little talk with me.
Dad, I had so many unanswered questions, zero healthy information, and no one with whom I could talk to about it. Porn these days is very violent and for many people addictive. It can be as addictive as drugs or alcohol. I wish I had known this earlier. This is the hard part to share with you. The first time I ever did something with a guy was with the help of a porn video. I used it to help me do the right things. I hate that porn has had such a strong focus on degrading and hurting women. Almost every sexual encounter I've had with a guy, they have done most of what I've seen on porn, and by that, I mean in a harsh and abusive way. It's very scary because this is so normalized for my age, and any guy who doesn't perform harsh or aggressive behavior to a woman would be considered too vanilla or innocent.
Why is that sex was only ever talked about in awkward and fleeting moments? Why was it so taboo to talk about in the first place? Why did I learn about sex from internet strangers and upperclassmen on the school bus than either of you?
My underage drinking is constantly happening at high school parties. Sophomore year, my best friend and I both attended our neighboring school's winter dance and the party that followed. My best friend got extremely intoxicated, and the next thing I knew, she disappeared into another room. I had no idea what had happened until the next morning when a rumor spread around that she had hooked up with a guy in our grade that had a history of sexually assaulting girls. I just believed it was a consensual hookup. Drunk one-night stands are so normalized in our society that it didn't even cross my mind that she may have been raped. She blamed herself for his unwanted and unconscionable actions. She was so intoxicated that all she could remember was his body on top of hers.
Here is what we need to be learning. What is healthy during sex and what is not? That it is normal to feel awkward sometimes, and it is not healthy to feel like you are just an object. It's okay to ask to stop in the middle of it, and it's not healthy to feel like you just gotta stick it out for your partner.
I wish I picked up on the red flags sooner. I was 15 years old. I did everything to please you, to make sure you were happy, but everything we did made me uncomfortable. Every message, every picture, every conversation. I had panic attacks after I did each of those things. You wouldn't let me stop when we were doing things sexually that hurt and scared me and made me uncomfortable. You didn't care about what I was experiencing. In my head, I kept thinking, this is how it's supposed to be. I'm not supposed to enjoy this. Gagging is normal. But I said yes. Dylan, you saw me sobbing, gagging, and ultimately begging you to stop, but you wouldn't let me. You wanted me to keep going.
I wish we talked about how saying no to certain men was harder than expected, and giving consent is way more important than we were ever taught. I now understand porn is not how I should perceive or expect sex. People my age see violent sex as normal. In other words, if a guy doesn't perform any type of sexual, harsh, or aggressive behavior, the guy would be seen as too innocent or vanilla. Teenagers have normalized violent sex as a direct result of what they learn in porn.
The way porn makes you think is scary, and can make you treat your partner in real life the same way you see it done in porn.
But now I know that isn't the only thing that matters. It matters that sometimes I am left feeling worthless after sex. It matters that I think I can make a boy love me with sex. It matters when the boy leaves before I even have my pants back on. It matters when you are bawling your eyes out the next morning wondering why you had sex. It matters when you have a pregnancy scare and there is no one there to tell you that it will be okay. It matters when you wake up in pain after sex and wonder if the sex was really consensual. It matters when you hear stories of other sexual assaults and wonder if what happened to you was assault or not. This is the information that really matters.
There is no doubt in my mind that if I had learned this information in high school, I would have avoided so many situations that put me in harm's way, mentally, emotionally, sexually, and physically.
Additionally, and most importantly, I learned that the women should enjoy sex. Unfortunately, we often get the message we should be fulfilled because the guy got pleasure. I should respect myself enough to ask for things done a way that is good for me instead of my partner telling me what he wants me to do that I am uncomfortable doing. I also learned that consent is not saying no, but saying enthusiastically yes. This means that if I do not desire to do something my partner wants me to do and they try to convince or persuade me, it is not consensual.
Time and time again, parents, educators, and modern society in general have failed to deliver a steadfast, caring, responsible sex education curriculum for how to explore with our bodies and minds as they work in harmony with others. Most young Americans, myself included, have been on the receiving end of this sad and harsh reality perpetrated from the lack of good, common sense sexual education here in the U.S., something you, our legislators and private schools, have the power to and should change. Incredibly, throughout my education, there was no talk about the anatomy of the human body, nothing about how to engage in safe, protected sex, and zero mention of the best way to make sure that both parties felt comfortable. There was also no mention of the negative effects of porn and how it can create sexual dysfunction and unhealthy expectations about your partners. Sadly, it took until my sophomore year of college in a class on sexual citizenship to realize that in porn, women are treated as second-class citizens. Often, the industry capitalizes on the vulnerabilities of actors using methods similar to sex trafficking. In order to compete for viewers, the women are forced to do degrading and unspeakable acts against their will. That was eye-opening to learn.
If we talked about consent and healthy relationships, I would have known how to say no from the very beginning. Most importantly, I would have known that physical abuse is not something your partner can just apologize for over and over. Mom, we should have talked about age limits, and that the senior jock football player doesn't want to ask out the new freshman because he's in love with her. There's too much of a power difference. I was so naive. It was a trap for failure.
I learned that sex for a lot of women is a performance rather than an intimate and consensual act shared among two people. I learned in my class that communication before, during, and after is healthy, while no communication, dreading sex with your partner, and being coerced into sex, for example, are warning signs of an unhealthy relationship.
Because of my class, I now know that you cannot consent to sex when you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Alcohol disrupts our decision making, and no matter what she said during that time, it is impossible to give consent. He denied her right to agency over her body. She's 1 in a million girls that this happens to, and 1 in 10 girls that this happened to at my own school.
The lack of education on how important communication is hurt me. The lack of consent education hurt me. The lack of education on sex and relationships hurt me. The lack of information about healthy, equal relationships hurt me.
I recognize the embarrassment or awkwardness that can feel choking at times when discussing this with your kids. But if what happened can be prevented in the future, then there is no excuse not to work through your awkwardness and talk to my sisters. You will need to teach them about consent, how to emotionally and physically treat your partner, that mutual pleasure as a sexual act is important, and that even if they gave consent, they can change their minds and say no at any point, at any time.
I wish I had known this stuff earlier so that I could have avoided violence and non-consensual sex.
7th grade me wishes that I never saw porn, but it's so easy to access. This is when we needed this lesson, before what we see in porn becomes normal.
I wish I had known the lasting negative effects that porn exposure would have on me. I wish I had known it would distort my views of sexual experience and consent. I wish I had known porn could be just as addictive as hard drugs. I wish I had known that healthy sex is not what is shown in porn. But most importantly, I wish adults understood that kids get exposed and that this exposure is too much for children to understand and comprehend.
I didn't know it's impossible to give consent after either party has touched a drop of alcohol. I've been living under the impression that that's a normal date night. I never realized that I've been sexually assaulted. My friends called me lucky.
To continuously watch impressionable men turn into rapists and abusers, or to watch others' confidence die because they've found themselves in the arms of too many, is both conflicting and taxing.
I'm happy that I found this class and for the knowledge I've gained. I know that this conversation will not happen, but I feel like I have a better grasp on who I want to be and how I want others to treat me in relationships. We may never have this conversation, and you'll never know that it was me who wrote this. Although you taught me some important things, you failed me in this regard.
I wish I knew that I could have said no, and that I had the right to change my mind at any time. I wish I would have recognized that our relationship wasn't healthy. You kept me away from my friends, you made me feel stupid when I asked for help with my homework, and you even assaulted me before we started dating.
If I had learned this earlier, maybe I wouldn't have tried to convince myself after I had sex that it was good. Maybe I wouldn't have let myself feel used time and time again.
I wish someone would have told me about the harmful effects of porn much earlier in my life. If I had known these things at an early age, then I would not have depended on porn to get rid of my sexual urges. Pursuing healthy relationships and having deep, meaningful conversations about what feels good and what we're both comfortable with would have been a great alternative to me in the long run.
You public school system could have changed this. You could usher in a new era of sexually and culturally literate young people that understand consent, healthy relationships, healthy communication for sexual partners, and the dangers of unequal power dynamics in relationships. I can only hope that this letter will convince you to implement an adequate sexual education program for high schoolers. One that goes into depth of these complex topics beyond the basic anatomy that we are currently taught.
I am writing this because I need you to know that it's not too late to change things. We have an opportunity to learn from the mistakes we've made.
Knowing all of this could have saved me from my bad experiences and trauma related to sex. Please take this into consideration and do better for my sisters.
You, our legislators, and our schools failed to teach me anything. I wonder if I was given comprehensive sexual education earlier on, if my experiences and partners would have been any better.
I am desensitized, and this is my grievance. So please, for me and the millions of others for whom I speak, consider this going forth in your education and the conduct of your character. It matters.